This is the Real Coaching Podcast. I'm Joel Filio, back with Paulo Souza. Paulo, how's it going in Kona?
It's going pretty good. Kona outside the race week is a very pleasant place to be.
Pretty cool race before it becomes a circus.
Yep.
So the last time we talked, we reviewed the Rio Olympics. Big event for the season, big event for our squads and coaching. And we've got a few more races to review. First up, WTS Edmonton. That was a big race for you and the triathlon squad. Why don't you talk us through the highlights from your view?
Yeah, it was really amazing. Summer Cook won WTS Edmonton. Was the first time that me as a coach had an athlete winning a WTS. It was a super exciting racing. The as you know well, the conditions in Canada at the beginning of September, the weather starts to turn really, really bad, and it was a really cold race. It wasn't wet like it was last year, but it was a very difficult conditions. And but in spite of that, we raced there last year and got our butts kicked. Basically, only one like Eric had a really good race last year, but other than that, everybody just had lots of problems with the cold. And this year we prepared a little bit better. And outside the cold, it was a course that was really good for summer. And she with her with some difficulties. She was able to execute her plan really well and have a dominating run that was just above everyone else, and it was really exciting racing. Like I've watched it, I've watched the broadcast since then, and it was a great spectacle, and yeah, it was a really, really great day.
Yeah, I mean, fancy the luck of Edmonton. I mean, first of all, I suppose you might question the wisdom of having a race in the far north of Alberta in the beginning of September, where it can be winter one day, summer the other the next day. And equally, both years in a row having really cold weekends, despite before and after being pretty decent. But yeah, as you said, it was much better than last year, where it was raining and even colder. But I mean, the first big performance like that, or the first win, is pretty special. And that congratulations to you and Summer. There was a great photo of you jumping, getting some airtime as Summer was passing. We'll see if I can find the link to that. It's on Twitter somewhere. But it was an interesting race, wasn't it? I mean, it went right down to the line. American sweep again. They've done that a few times, and with someone new on top, which I imagine makes some directors from other countries think, what's going on in the US. But I think Summer's a pretty special story coming, really probably from not a lot of people having a lot of confidence in her to rebuilding herself before that win.
Mm-hmm. Well, she's been like every athlete to get to the top. She's going through a long process, and it's the like I talked to her. I've talked to her a bunch of times. It's every athlete to get to the top has a major difficulty. In her case, it's the bike. She's a very good swimmer and a very good runner, and the bike is her main obstacle. And we worked really hard. I know that sometimes if you're watching online, you're thinking like, oh my God, like, don't these guys like work on the bike skills? It's just we do. It's just a day-to-day struggle, but that's the essence of the process. Many athletes struggle every day to get their swimming better. Many athletes struggle every day to get their running fitness better. Like in the case of Summer, she struggled every day to get her cycling better, and it was good to see what she's capable of. And as you know, this a lot of times, like winning at this level is incredibly motivating and just builds the confidence of an athlete up, and they certainly suddenly they see evidence of what they're capable of doing, and that's a pretty powerful motivator moving forward.
Exactly. I mean, I was talking about this with someone else the other day about these confidence turning points, where we say, oh, confidence is important. Of course, it's an obvious thing, but this contradiction of athletes sort of needing that external evidence to reinforce belief, and it really can be a turning point of, the right things happening. Sometimes they make it happen. Sometimes they get a bit lucky, but they get some evidence of that, and it really can lead to bigger and better things down the road. And I've known athletes that desperately needed that kind of boost to some kind of performance. They needed the stars to align, and it never did. And in some cases, they just never seemed to achieve what they're capable of. So, I mean, it's also a case of patience and process. We live in a get results now, short-term environment, and sometimes in that process, it just takes time, and you just have to keep doing your job, and believing and coming out the other side, and then you can get some of those performances.
Yeah, it's all about that. It's just a lot of times those turning points. I know you're a big believer in those turning points. I'm more of sometimes things happen in one day, but doesn't mean that they're not going to happen in another day. But for sure, it's just those moments where you break through and have a result that just shows you like, hey, this is what you're capable of doing. Just like the motivation, and obviously you got to turn it into motivation. You can't turn it into kind of like feeling added pressure or just thinking like, now I have to win every race that I start. But it's a pretty powerful motivator for the athlete, and also for me as a coach, it was just it's just a little bit of validation of the work that I do every day, and a little bit of a reward, and for that it was pretty special.
For sure, some of those moments, they can equally be turning points in for coaches. When you get some of that external validation, say, hey, what we're doing is good, and a lot of the time we toil away in obscurity, or it feels like it anyway, and then to get some of that evidence. But it was an interesting race overall. We had a breakaway with we're talking about the women at the moment, the breakaway, and from speaking with and watching the race, it looked fairly a smooth break. It wasn't very aggressive. We might have expected perhaps somebody like Flora Duffy to break things up, but they were satisfied with the gap they had, and all the podium came from that group. We'll talk about Flora when we go on to the Cozumel Grand Final, but it was interesting in just how they dealt with it, and I think equally these races that are sort of like a couple weeks apart, and particularly after something like Rio, are always a coaching challenge, where you got these gaps that they aren't very big. A couple weeks apart, we had, I think we had Rio 2 weeks, Edmonton 2 weeks, Cozumel, and they're not easy ones to deal with from a coaching point of view. I think when you're thinking about chronic load, you're thinking about acute load, you're thinking about, in some cases, for many of those athletes there, having a sort of a peak experience like the games is not easy to then sort of come out of and back into focus on event. And at least from my point of view, that's kind of why we had that event, was to, in the calendar of the athletes, was to sort of keep some momentum going, keep some focus going through Cozumel. But equally the other side of that, and I know you had kind of athletes doing both different type of programs, was kind of really refocusing and getting some training done prior to Cozumel. So how do you see the sort of the difference between those approaches?
Yeah, well, in terms of summer, the transition to Cozumel didn't go that well. She got sick on the when she got like on the week of Cozumel, so that transition didn't go as planned. As you know, the people that are coming from the Olympics, it's a very powerful experience for them. So I think that different things are going to work for different people. Like keeping them focused and going on to the next race is valid. going back home and getting some work for the Cozumel Grand Final is something that's valid. I think that finding the approach that works for the individual is going to be really important. Also depends on the environment that you can create. In my case, for several reasons and different race schedules and all that, I didn't have like a strong squad at camp to work between the Olympics and Cozumel. So kind of like it might make more sense to do Edmonton. But I'll get down and say that it's going to be like an individual thing. I thought that, for example, for Greg and Joe, it would be better for them to skip Edmonton, and they had some commitment and also kind of like settle down a little bit. And so I would say that's it's going to be an individual thing.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about sort of the individual approach to coaching, and that there's not sort of necessarily a right plan for everybody. I mean, that's a great reason why. I mean, from our part, we had athletes, most of whom couldn't go home, so they went straight to Edmonton after Rio. Tried to maintain the focus, get out of the home environment. Post Olympics can be a bit crazy, whether you're very successful or not. There's often quite a lot of interest in sort of that post Olympics media push, and for most of our guys, Edmonton being training there was actually a really tough period. As it happens, all of my guys got a post Rio illness, some sort of heavy chest cough, and made it really quite difficult. In fact, we lost two of the four starters we had, who just really couldn't recover from that kind of Rio hangover, chest cough, and they ended up going home. And really, even before the race, it was touch and go. For example, whether Rich Murray and Mario Mola were even going to be able to start, but they came around in time and ended up having quite good performances. So I didn't know what to expect on the day. But in the men's race, of course, we had Johnny chasing the points for the World Series, coming off a really strong performance in Karlovy Vary, Czech Republic the week before. So he backed up, maybe took the focus approach of just bouncing across races. But he was in the breakaway with Aaron Royal from Australia and the usual Varga from Slovakia, and they had it really looked like it was going to close down after the first lap. But perhaps again we had the at least from my point of view, Rich and Mario in the wrong groups, but opposite this time to Rio, and Mario had to work very hard to catch the next group. And originally the second group was just 20 seconds back, but they couldn't close the gap, and they got it down to 10, and then it went out a few seconds. But Johnny ran very well to take the win, while the other two were well absorbed in the pack. What did you see on the ground there on the men's side?
I thought it was interesting that it was a little bit of a race like sometimes French Grand Prix races develop like this, where the front guys only have like a really small gap and they keep it the whole race, and that's still sufficient to win the race. That's what happened there. In fact, at T2, like the first guy to come out from the chase pack out of T2 was less than 10 seconds from Johnny, but that's little time, and the time that probably like Johnny came out of transition maybe with 15 to 20 seconds to Rich and Mario, that was sufficient on the day for him to make a difference. It was a really good performance. It was interesting that it seems that the Brownlees are able to have official and non-official domestics to work for them, which was what happened again also in Cozumel. We'll talk about that later. But it was a really solid performance from Johnny, because obviously when you're on a breakaway with three guys, nobody's taking a break. So basically Johnny was also working really hard, and it was a really good performance.
Yeah, I mean, it was also a race where there was some perhaps surprise performances, people taking the opportunity that was there. There was Grant Sheldon from Britain that was in fourth, running with Rich and Mario for a while, and then Tom Bishop, who was really in training for a domestique role but didn't get selected for Rio, but he had quite a solid run as well, and I think it was around fifth. So it's an interesting race. It's always an opportunity post-Olympics for somebody, you know, if they've come in with a lot of energy and take advantage of the situation to have a great performance. But that's the great thing about triathlon. Post games, it just rolls on, and there you go. There's the opportunity. 70.3 Worlds. That was another a big one for you personally. I didn't have anyone actually racing this year, but you had the Wurtels, and Heather had a fantastic race, didn't she?
Yeah, it was a good race. We've been focusing on this race for most of the season. The Heather, the fact that she validated to go to Kona in Ironman Cozumel last year allowed for her to just focus on 70.3s for the whole season and then Kona. And so we were focused on this race for a long time. We kind of thought that the bike course and being in Australia was going to be a situation that was not very favorable for Heather's characteristics, but obviously it was a world championship, and she was one of the contenders. So we fully committed to it, and I thought it was a really good performance from Heather. I kind of joked after the race that our biggest goal was to beat Daniela Riff. So we got that, but obviously there were athletes that finished ahead of Heather on the day, but I was really happy with seeing Heather on the podium for the third year in a row, which makes me feel pretty good in saying that.
Indeed, I mean, we haven't seen Daniela lose a race or not be dominant in a while, but given the season she's had, probably understandable that she wasn't. But that obviously the thing to talk about is the dominance of Holly Lawrence of Great Britain or Wales. I mean, she's an interesting athlete because she doesn't have a long history in triathlon, and certainly in 70.3 racing, but she absolutely dominated this race, and I think came off the bike with 5 minutes. And during the race, I watched it live. I know you did as well, live with the coverage, and there was quite actually decent coverage for once. I can't always say that about Ironman Live, but in this case, we were able to watch some video. And one of the things that you could see during the race and there was some discussion about this on the TRS podcast, which I listened to. I think you might have as well, and approaching it, but from your point of view, there was the commentary about how close she was to the motorcycle and whether that's an advantage. And the TRS podcast, they kind of touched on this as well. Is it the athlete responsibility? Is it the motorbike? Of course, you can get an advantage from this sort of thing. I mean, it's been going on for years. It's in some cases the athletes seek out the bike to try to get a bit of draft, and sometimes the roads are so narrow that it is actually quite difficult to get away from it. But how did you see it? What is your opinion on the whole the motorcycle and the bike gap?
Well, you probably followed my rants on Twitter while I was watching the race. I thought that there were situations where I thought that overall the drafting off the camera bike was a big advantage for the leader. There were situations, like you said, where it was unavoidable, but I saw also some situations where the camera motorcycle is riding the center line, and the leader just moved towards the center line to be drafting off the motorbike, and other situations that I think you also saw this some video that was available on Twitter where on the section with the loops that was, like you said, really narrow, but we had situations where the distance was motor pacing distance between the rider and the camera, the motor camera. Obviously here there's going to be I think that motorcycles are a problem in triathlon, in not only in long distance but also in ITU racing. We see a lot of the times the camera motorcycle being really close and providing an advantage for the front pack and being a factor in races, but obviously in a race where the bike lasts more than 2 hours, it's going to be a huge advantage, and I think that it was a huge factor in the results for that race.
I mean, ultimately, it's got to be the responsibility of the organizers, I think, in order to get these bikes away. I mean, and it's affected other races. I mean, sometimes you've got to be on the course to see whether what's actually happening or not. I mean, it's the classic, pictures of age groupers drafting or even pros drafting when it's a still shot or even a video. Sometimes it's hard to see depending on the angle. But, we've seen it in ITU races where as well, in fact, in Johnny Brownlee's interview at Edmonton, one of the things he's saying, he's wondering whether the chase pack got an advantage with the motorbike, and I don't know, I didn't see that. But equally, we've seen the other side where those that were in Cape Town World Series this year were feeling that the breakaway group, of which Johnny was in, was equally getting an advantage following the bike through some of the narrow roads there. Mm-hmm. So it definitely can have an impact on the race. And whenever I see that, it's always frustrating, depending which point of view you take. But from the point of view of fair racing, we never want these factors, external factors, to impact the race. But then, of course, there was the Lionel Sanders post-race commentary moving on to the men's, and that wasn't have to do with motorcycles so much, but the nature of these championship races and these packs that form. And initially I thought, there's really nothing new here. I know you had some commentary as well, Polo, but there's nothing new here. This has been going on since, all championship races, since basically they started doing both 70.3 And I mean, Hawaii, since there was any media interest, the external factors have always been there, and you've got to swim fast enough to make the pack, and it's a reality of the race.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you the conversation that I had with Heather was the first time that I heard that 70.3 Worlds were going to be in Mooloolaba, and she said, the 70.3 Worlds are going to be in Mooloolaba in 2016. And I just told her, well, it looks like there's going to be a lot of drafting. It's one of those things where, the combination of the course plus being in Australia, it was like drafting was going to be a factor. And looking at the men's race at 70.3 Worlds, looking at the race before the race, you already know that you have to swim fast enough so that you can get on that train. And it doesn't mean that everybody is drafting off that train, but what I saw from the men's race was a situation where the first 10 or 12 guys were maybe riding clean or riding 12 meters behind, which means that they're getting an advantage. But there were people at the back that were just definitely not riding 12 meters, and they were riding. I saw some instances of right on the wheel. Then this was on the flat part of the course. But the reality of the race is you have to make that pack. And if you see, for example, if you see the way Sebastian Kienle rode the race, what he did was just get on the train as quickly as possible. So he rode the first section very, very hard to just get on that train, and that's just the way the sport is. And even if everybody was riding riding clean and on riding by the rules at all times, that front pack was still going to be faster than anyone riding on their own. So that's just triathlon, and this has been triathlon for decades now. It's as soon as the sport became more competitive, obviously these are going to be the the unwritten rules of you need to swim fast enough to just get up there and just be in the race,
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's a reality. You've got to prepare for it, and the only real solution, much smaller fields and bigger draft zones and course selections, but that perhaps make it more difficult. But at the moment, it's a reality, and you've got to be the complete athlete, and it's much different race than small races. But then championship races are always different than small races in a lot of ways. So nothing new there. It's the same reason why you go watch Kona and you just see how fast they're riding the first 40K and you think this doesn't make any sense, but that's what you got to do, right? You gotta get on the train or race your own race.
Yeah,
pick one of them.
That's what you got to. I mean, one thing that was interesting is that a few years ago when they had those races on in I don't know, Abu Dhabi or Qatar or Dubai or one of those places, when they had a race with a 20-meter draft zone. The 20-meter draft zone worked really, really well. It was just a situation where it just like 20 meters is large enough so that even if you're riding 18, you're not getting an advantage. And if you're riding 12, everyone can see that you're too close, So 20 meters worked really well. I mean, I would be in favor of switching to 20 meters for pro racing in Ironman. I don't know what are their plans. I think that Ironman is too tied down to the notion that the rules need to be the same between age groupers and pros. But I think that 20 meters for the pros would be great for racing.
And that gets back to the numbers in the field again, and I mean that's a perennial discussion with Ironman and equally 70.3. If you've got too many in the field, then these big gaps are perhaps difficult. But then too few, and there's other reasons why you might not want to do that. But that's a debate for another time. But one of our favorite topics, which we're going to touch on after talking about Cozumel, is the TUE stuff. But again, listening to the TRS podcast, post 70.3 World Champs, back to Holly Lawrence. I mean, I think nowadays, with the sort of environment, the anti-doping environment being what it is, with the skepticism and cynicism about sport being what it is, I think we've got to at least briefly address the whole entourage side of things. And it's clear that, and I don't know Holly personally at all, but it's clear that she wasn't really willing to talk about it. And I think Ben Hobbs did a good job of touching on the issue, really. But the whole thing of entourage, I think, is really important of who you surround yourself with, because now I think, keen observers of sport, all sport now, look at things with a different light than they did years ago. And I think, perception, as always, can end up being reality, whether you like it or not. And, and I think basically the issue at hand is, one of Holly's sponsors and coach is a company called Train Sharp, based in Britain, of which Sean Yates is a partner. And it's not clear how his involvement in her coaching, but his involvement with British Cycling and Team Sky, and subsequently leaving Team Sky when there was essentially a line drawn in the sand saying, Brailsford said, if anyone's got a doping past, this is your time to get out. And because we don't want anybody with that history moving forward from this point. Mm-hmm. And he disappeared from the team. There wasn't, he was just he said he was retiring for personal reasons. That it didn't come out that he was involved in doping, but then he appeared in a new cycling team not long after, of which the name is escaping me, either Astana or Tinkoff. But nonetheless, the question is there, and I think it deserves answers. And when we're talking about Farah and the questions he's had to answer, or Froome or Wiggins or any of these athletes that are in the current spotlight, I think being aware of your entourage, being aware of who's around you. I mean, you look at the PR disaster that Sky has had with the hiring of former Rabobank doctor who is implicated in doping, Gert Leinders. And there we are. I mean, if you're a clean athlete, you've got to be very, very careful about this. And I think a willingness to talk about it is not a bad thing. And I understand, perhaps the fear of being caught in an interview or not knowing what to say, but not to bring out the old, if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear. But at the same time, I think a certain amount of transparency is necessary nowadays in terms of dealing with these kind of questions.
Yeah, we have a situation here where somebody that was deeply immersed in the cycling doping culture is involved in directly or indirectly in coaching a top triathlete, and that's going to raise questions. I mean, we're very far removed from that, from when people were saying, no, I'm just getting training plans from Dr. Ferrari, and people would say like, oh, okay, this guy's not involved with anything dodgy, we're way past that. We're in this environment now where basically, and I think you're going to agree with me, which is like all of our worst doping nightmares are turning out to be real. It's just the people that even the squeaky clean Team Sky, turns out that they are just gaming the system, and we can talk about that later. But coming back to this Holly Lawrence thing, I mean, it would be really easy for her to just come out and say, hey, and she's a very young athlete. She would just come out and say like, hey, I had no idea that I was associated with Sean Yates. This is an association that as a clean athlete I don't want to have. So I just choose not to have any association with him. And that's not, I haven't seen any denials. They could have denied saying like, well, she's coach, she's working with Train Sharp, but she has no connection to Sean Yates, which I think would not be satisfactory. But I haven't seen anything like that, and we have a situation where basically everything that we thought like, oh, that guy seems dodgy, that guy seems to have like some connections to doping, it's everything's turning into reality. So basically, in 2016, everybody's asking questions, and it's not just me or you. It's just like the fans, whenever they see somebody crossing the finish line, they say like, is that person doped? Is that athlete doped? That's the first thing that pops into their heads. So this level of scrutiny over every athlete is there. And when we have an athlete that has connections to somebody that's, let's make no mistake, this is a person that's like a hardcore member of the old Omerta society, because he's a guy that spent I don't know how many years in the same team with Lance Armstrong, and he said that he never saw any doping, which just tells you that we just tell you from what we know from the Armstrong years, we know that was simply impossible. We heard from other riders saying that Lance was just enforcing doping on everybody on his team. So and this guy was like part of that environment. So when he's saying that he never saw doping, he's lying and maintaining a culture of silence that's just simply, it was never acceptable. It's simply not acceptable in 2016. And seeing a top triathlete associated with somebody like that, it's very concerning for me as a coach and also as a fan of the sport.
Absolutely. I mean, and maybe we ought to just roll into the whole Fancy Bear leak now, and we'll come back to Cozumel, because I think it's a good roll on. So some organization has hacked into the WADA database and is now releasing, seemingly on some sort of schedule, the basically print screens or data that the athletes have inputted and whereabouts and TUE applications and the rationale and everything. And it's concerning on a number of levels. One of them is the whole sort of security of this organization. And as we saw with the Russian whistleblowers earlier in the summer, their location being leaked and potentially put at danger is worrisome. But the whole integrity of the system. I mean, we've talked extensively of WADA and the weaknesses and pros and cons of their approach, but I think that's not an issue here. But it has exposed this whole concept of TUEs, the abuse of TUEs, and potentially as one way that athletes are seeking to gain an advantage, and sort of under the guise, of course, of a legitimate illness, you can apply if you're ill, you have an allergy, asthma, or some sort of illness that you need acute medication for that's otherwise banned, then you can apply for a therapeutic use exemption, which is what a TUE is, and the three components of that, of course, are the athlete and their doctor, and WADA as the anti-doping organization, and then usually the International Federation has to approve it. So there's kind of three components of that, and it certainly appears that there are questions being raised about some of these. Some of the leaked data looks perfectly legitimate. I mean, people get ill all the time, and sometimes it's very difficult, and you've got to take something. I do like the I think it's pretty much now defunct, but the movement for credibility and pro cycling, that organization which proposed that if you needed a TUE, that you actually don't start racing. I think that would be a nice move, but barring that, it appears that there are real questions about the timing of some of these. And one of the ones I was reading about was the timing of Wiggins, who was getting injections of kind of a very powerful, I believe, anti-allergen type drug that side effect of weight loss at the same time before his Target tours every year. And, the cynic in you would say he's doing that from a performance advantage. We don't know for sure what's going on there, whether it's preventative or not, but it doesn't look good, does it?
Yeah, it's the Fancy Bears leak exposed something that we thought was a possibility, which is the abuse of TUEs, and I'm sure that like a lot of those TUEs are going to be things that are going to be things that are going to be legal, but at the same time, like you said, like I think that the most scandalous leak is the one associated with Brad Wiggins, where he's just he's getting injections of a very powerful corticosteroid for pollen allergy. But looks like these pollen allergies usually comes 1 week before a grand tour, which is obviously bogus, and other situations. For example, like we already knew about the TUE that Chris Froome had in 2013, where he started the Tour of Romandy so sick that he needed prednisone, and he ended up winning the race. It's just like and a lot of times we see in the press, situations where an athlete comes out and says, I was really sick. I was really sick at the beginning of the week, and now thanks to my doctors, I had an amazing recovery and I won this race. And you see that a bunch of times, and you kind of like think like, did that guy get a TUE? And maybe he was sick, but it's kind of like a lot of gray zone in the process, and it's not just with cortisone abuse, because cortisone abuse, it's pretty big because it's legal out of competition. So we can imagine a system where you're doing cortisone in training all of the time, and because the clearance rates are really slow, you're going to know like, hey, I'm going to test positive for for cortisone in the competition that's coming. So I need a TUE so that when I have a adverse finding, I'm going to be covered by the TUE. So the possibilities of abusing TUEs are endless. Another example is, for example, a lot of U.S. athletes have TUEs for Ritalin or Adderall, and as you know, or the listeners know, ADHD is a diagnosis that's very American. So basically, a lot of children also adults get diagnosed for ADHD in the U.S., and the rates of diagnosis of ADHD in the rest of the world is it's not as high. But at the same time, a diagnosis of ADHD is something that's relatively easy to fake, and if an athlete is out to fake that, he's going to have a license to take amphetamines before each of their competitions, which is an incredible advantage from a performance level across all sports. Like baseball players were taking amphetamines back in the day, and cyclists, and amphetamines are just a magic drug. The only problem that they have is you're going to be testing positive for them for sure and for a long time. So the Fancy Bears League provide us a look into more of a gray area that's we already knew that the thyroid medication a gray area. This is another gray area. I think that the TUEs are a little bit kind of like a first world organized doping kind of thing, and it's a concern. At the same time, one side effect of this leak is just exposing Team Sky and their bullshit. It's just we've been listening to their marginal gains bullshit, and turns out that they're saying that there are no needles, and both Froome and Wiggins are getting injections of glucocorticosteroids, and basically it sounds that their marginal gains is just the good old school gain of taking cortisone.
I mean, it does seem like cortisone out of competition is a huge hole in the process. I mean, it's amazing to me that this has not been plugged somehow, and I don't know why exactly, but the use of cortisone to lose weight, and the problem of it being a systemic drug. So basically that means you can take it at any route of, for example, oral or topical or injected, and it shows up in the system when often, you get a TUE, for example, for a specific injury. And but it's going to show up in the test. So it could be intra-articular, like into a joint or into a tendon, but it'll show up everywhere. It doesn't show up only in one area. And perhaps that's it's very old school, but perhaps still using that to drop weight before these grand tours or other competitions. I mean, certainly heard rumors of that before in triathlon, of the fake injury and subsequent weight loss. But for sure, this has got to be plugged. I mean, it's ridiculous that this is allowed. And one way is to test for the levels. And if you're too high, then you're out. You can't compete. And I think there's a real case for that of raising the whole issue of should you be allowed to compete if you are having a TUE for these kind of substances.
Absolutely. The possibilities of cortisone abuse are just endless. For example, I don't know what's the clearance rate for cortisone, and you don't, but I'm sure that there's people that know. And so basically, the easiest way that you can abuse the system is just use it in training until the date that you say no, this is going to have to clear before my next race, and I'm just going to stop using it. And the deal with the intra-articular, like you pointed out, it's just the possibility for abuse. There is, you've been doing cortisone all along for months, and then you approach a race and you come up and say, my ankle is really injured, I'm really pain. I need an intra-articular shot of cortisone. You get that shot, and you might not get the shot, and then you test positive for cortisone, you say like, oh, it was the intra-articular shot that I had, and that's perfectly legal, So like the possibilities for abuse here are just tremendous, and they need to be plugged because as you can see, there's people at the highest level of sport abusing it and using it to just dominate sports, and you kind of like see, you look at Bradley Wiggins. It's just like, this is a guy that was a pursuit time trial cyclist kind of dude, and all of a sudden loses an amazing amount of weight, and he turns into a Grand Tour contender. And then it was kind of like he shows up the next season, after his tour win, and he's just like, he looked like a different guy. He was back at being the old Bradley Wiggins, or just like, weights like everywhere. He was not the incredibly skinny Bradley Wiggins. So it just basically like that, looking at him, and he's changed through the years, and now looking at the TUEs, you just go like, man, this guy had an amazing benefit from so he doped legally, and it's incredibly concerning.
Yeah, I mean, and Wiggins is an interesting one, living in Britain, for what it's worth, because you see the massive nationalism part of this discussion, in that, the effect of these sort of heroes. And Wiggins is a very kind of interesting character. I think he appeals to, the average Brit, and a lot of people have a lot of respect for him, and yet you kind of contrast that with what you're reading here. And I mean, it reminds me, and I'm sure you, very much of the US postal days, the early days of Armstrong's dominance, where, there's these rabid defenders that really seem to be coming at it from a point of nationalism first. And we're going to get probably just very briefly touch on this when we talk about Cozumel, but the same factor. And I think, I think we've just got to put aside what country they're from, because as we've talked about when we talked about the Russian stuff. I mean, it's way too easy to make the guy from the other country the villain, and the guy from your country the hero. I mean, it's just vastly oversimplifying things, and it blinds people, just as it did, blinded an entire continent when Armstrong was winning. So I mean, it's the other thing that we've talked about and debated somewhat is the public nature of this, and I think obviously neither of us condone a leak, but it does raise the legitimate question: is, shouldn't TUEs actually be public? That every TUE granted, I think for any performance-based substance, that ought to be public and searchable in a database, and that, participating in elite sport is not a right. Athletes already give up rights in terms of privacy, whereabouts, having to complete an hour every day of where they are. I mean, they have to urinate in front of someone. Privacy is a bizarre concept for sport, and yet that's often trotted out as the reason that we ought not to know about this. So what's your take on that?
Well, it's exactly what you just said. These athletes have to tell the system where they are at all times. They have a slot that they can be tested, that they choose, but they can be tested pretty much at any time. For example, like in France, they can even get tested like in the middle of the night. So they can wake them up and say, okay, time for testing. And like you said, like they don't have like the minimum amount of privacy, which means that like a tester needs to see you pee into the cup, and even because why? Because people used to use, and probably still do, use fake urine, because as you know, like not all testers are going to enforce that. Some do, some don't. And then when you propose that TUEs are going to be public, people are going to go like, oh no, that's the invasion of privacy of the athletes. I mean, we're already like, the system invades their privacy at a really deep level already. It's not going to be like, I don't think that there's nobody that's going to be shamed into like, oh, did you hear that this athlete's got asthma? It's just like, no, I don't think that's going to be a big problem. I don't think there's going to be any disease that's going to provide a stigma for the athletes. I mean, there's no stigma associated with ADHD. You know, people are just like, hey, this person's got a problem. You know, so the issue of just like invasion of privacy of the athletes, it's just bogus, because like the system already invades the athletes' privacy at a pretty deep level. So this would not be like something that would be like a added burden to the athletes.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I would be totally in favor of that. And, you know, I mean, it sort of feels like and we've talked about this ad nauseum really, but that, you know, with the advent of being able to share information so quickly and how quickly it spreads, I mean, the anti-doping movement, if you can call that, it just feels like we're getting crushed and, you know, we're losing badly this. And I don't know if that's the case or whether it's just reading the stories, but we've got to do something. And I think this is one area, where there's a potential win here to at least publicly disclose this, and it's not the end of the fight of anti-doping. I mean, in some cases, you know, in this league, it turns up that you know, there isn't a lot of TUEs involved. You know, people would have speculated that that Mo Farah had a bunch of TUEs, but he didn't. So, you know, if he's doping, it's not that way. So, but it's one area, for example, that I think we can make a movement on, and
Joel, you don't need TUEs when you spend most of your year in Ethiopia, where there's no doping controls. So I think that explains the lack of TUEs from Mo Farah.
And you know, I mean, I've certainly been thinking about this, and you know, I would be surprised if I certainly hope none of the athletes that I've worked with having TUEs without my knowledge. I know of a couple, and you know, on some of these issues, like, you know, whether you ought to race or not. I mean, when an athlete I know has needed a prednisone TUE, they're in no condition to race, and they're not winning any multi-day bike tour or anything like that. There's no chance. So legitimate illness, you know, I think, you know, for the most part, you're not racing. And, you know, I saw an article recently about kind of an athlete having a great performance and then sort of thanking his medical team for sort of like the miracle of saving him. And it again kind of makes me think of the Holy Lawrence thing. Like, in this day and age, like, you just got to be careful saying stuff like that, because the immediate thing is like, oh, what happened there? I wonder if this athlete was really, really ill. I wonder if this is just one of those, you know, sort of fake illnesses to get a boost. And, you know, anecdotally, people that take drugs like prednisone or prednisolone, depending, they often talk about feeling superhuman when they're not actually ill. So, you know, this make me think, and, you know, and just an example of practice, you know, I'm sure if, for example, Mario or Rich had pushed it when they were ill before Edmonton, they probably could have got something like that. But that's just not the way we operate. And, you know, we end up, you know, the best you can do is take some BS over-the-counter thing that really does nothing, and you just sort of hoping it does something, hoping there's some placebo effect, but really you can't take anything, particularly in some countries that, you know, the typical over-the-counter like cold and flu stuff can be full of stimulants, which you're not allowed to take close to a race. You're not allowed to take in competition. If you're getting too close, you can't take them. And so really you can't do anything. And you just, you know, hoping, and just the approach of some people, you know, I just wonder they're not even ill going for it. So TUE is something that's got to be addressed. And I think there's an opportunity there for WADA to get after it.
Yep.
So let's move on to the grand final. So Cozumel ITU grand final have just returned. Fresh in the mind. I'm sure you followed to some degree, although I think you might have been out supporting a long ride for your Kona prep during one of the races. But it was a wild race. I mean, the start. I mean, when you have Olympic distance race in Cozumel, probably at any time of the year, you're going to get a hot race. You're going to get an extreme race, and that's what we got. And I mean, the obvious images Al carrying Johnny over the line. I mean, it's had a massive global impact. No doubt, many times more than the triathlon in Rio even.
Yeah, it was I didn't follow closely the women's race, but I was watching the broadcast during the men's race, and that ending was just tremendous. It was I was watching, and all of a sudden, like, Johnny's just like running funny, and you kind of like identified that way of running, and you knew that some heat illness was happening there, and then being carried over across the line was just like drama filled. It was just pretty amazing. Like, I even now I can't like tell you that, like, oh, I think that was legal, I think that was illegal, I think that the sporting moment, I think, just like took over in that situation, and it's kind of like it was just overwhelming drama. It was just that.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, we've seen both Brownlees in that state before. Al in London a few years ago, of all places. Johnny at Gold Coast this year. I mean, some people, their switch off valve, if you like, or whatever the switch that some people possess that tells them to slow down, it just doesn't function on these guys, and they get too close to the danger zone before you can, as you said, they start running awkwardly, and you can just see like their body shutting down. Central nervous system does not work anymore. It's awkward. It looks like a melted down Ironman athlete. And yeah, I mean, for Johnny, it just looked like mistimed. He was leading at the time. Al and Henry were a few strides back, and probably less than a K to go, just melted down, and basically had to be carried across the finish line or dragged by Al, which was the moment, as you say, like it just made a global impact. And of course, then there was the inevitable sort of controversy, and it's very difficult kind of to be on the ground there to actually know what was happening. First of all, I didn't actually see any of that, and I can only describe the race from on the ground, and I think I've said this about Rio before. When you've got guys like Mario and Rich, who on their day are capable of winning, and it brings an extra special kind of pressure, an extra special feeling, that day when what's possible, and knowing Mario was, in the lead of the World Series, we knew obviously exactly what places he needed to finish. If Johnny won, Mario needed to be third, second, fifth, third, sixth, fourth, seventh, etc. We knew exactly what place it was. And the race just didn't look to be going that way. I mean, the first part, it was an interesting swim. I mean, it was an ocean swim for basically half, or a little more than half, and then it went into a marina. And there's quite a decent current on the way out. And there's the usual sort of dance these guys play on the podium. On the pontoon, sorry, it's become quite tactical. When you've got a guy like Mario, who's not known to be a front pack swimmer, who's ranked first, it's quite interesting because with the tactics of where you place yourself feel important anyway. But Mario lost his goggles and cap some point during the first stretch of the swim, and when they came into the marina, you were right on top of them. They were right next to the wall, and when you're coach, you're scanning for your athletes, and you can see the dude with no cap on sticks out like a sore thumb, and thinking on one hand,
no cap and no goggles
in salt water. And you're just thinking, oh, Jesus. And on one hand, he's having a good swim. He's in a good position. On the other hand, he can't see anything. And he's crashing into people behind him. Can't see a gap in front, potentially. And, so there's that kind of mixed emotion there. And, probably just address it now. There was some discussion. There was even a video of this discussion between Al and Mario later, and there was some words, and it sort of seemed like Al might have been the guy that that Mario collided with, and perhaps ripped the goggles off, and I think they've kind of really resolved it now. I mean, this kind of thing happens in racing all the time. You never know, and it really is beside the point of whether it was intentional or not. I mean, you like to think really not, but when they people crash into each other, it's very, very tough. This is not open water swim racing. Triathlon racing is full contact, and these things happen. And I think it really had a marginal impact on the race. And Mario said it best after the race. This happens. What do? You keep going. You do your best, and you don't need goggles, as Hewitt and Rio showed. So, but then the breakaway on the bike goes as you expect, and everyone, I suppose, knew what Al and Johnny were going to do, and they did their very best to make a real situation where they extended the gap, and it kind of went out from 20, 25, 45, and then it jumped, around lap 5, it jumps up to over a minute when kind of everyone in the chase group gets tired, and they come off the bike with like a minute 20, and from my view, it's like, oh, this is not good, and Johnny was looking great through most of the run, and if anybody, it was Al that I thought was cracking earlier, but in the end he was strong, and it was Johnny, and even probably with 1K to go, Mario passed with Bailey. Rich had been a bit off the front there, and I was just like, oh, it's over, we've lost it, and I was walking with Mario's fiance Carol. We were sort of walking slowly, trying to find our way back to the finish, and not feeling so hot about the situation, and checking then the the old Twitter, as you do, and the timing, and when pull up the timing, say, oh, Henry's got it. I'm thinking, what's happened here? And then kind of realizing, wait a minute, Mario's got 5th. That means he's won, and just going from this total transformation of being really kind of angry, upset, sad that we've lost this, to elation in the span of a few seconds, and then frantically refreshing Twitter, like, is that right? Is that right? Did that actually happen? Because it didn't look like that, 4 minutes ago when they passed by, and and that's racing, isn't it? I mean, you've got to time it to the end, and in those kind of conditions, there's very little room for error, and I think it just didn't go Johnny's way. I mean, he the heat was too much, and he shut down.
Yeah, it was so much drama in the race. It was pretty amazing. Yeah, I mean, I can imagine you, just like, because when you're out there, you're usually not at the finish line when you're working a race, and if you saw it at 1K to go, you're like thinking like, well, not gonna have the world champion today, and then in the end, yes, you had the world champion. So that was pretty amazing. I felt that like you said, like such a big part of performing at that race is the way you manage the conditions, and you manage the approach to the race. I feel that like the conditions were a big factor. I've seen some people thinking like, well, we shouldn't have raced there. It wasn't like it was unexpected, it wasn't something like, we already knew that the race was going to be very hard in terms of heat management, and so everybody had an opportunity to prepare for it. The only thing that I was thinking was that it was that perhaps Johnny being in Edmonton and the cold weather didn't help him prepare for Cozumel, because just being exposed to cold weather sometimes can remove some of the adaptations to racing in the heat, and that might have been a factor in that race.
Yeah, I mean, it's no secret that certainly from our point of view, we knew this was a possibility that he might not make it, because we've seen it before, and And it was a little bit disappointed, to be honest, when they first moved the start from 3 to 4:30. It was this happened basically on the day of the under-23 men's race. It was a particularly hot day, and the sun was very strong when they started, and subsequently all the races were moved. Really, so in the end, although it was very hot, it wasn't as hot as it could have been. And then equally, there was, from what I understand, a big push for it to be a sprint race, and as you say, you prepare for the conditions. I mean, I remember going through this very thing in preparation for the Beijing Olympics in 2008, and just the whole cooling, preparation, heat training, all of those elements of it. When you know what the race is going to be, you prepare for it, and everybody has that opportunity. There's always going to be some people that are just going to struggle more in heat or cold.
Yes.
And that's just, it is what it is. I mean, we often are going to have a lot of cold finals because of where they typically are in the season. And we have had that, and this was the hottest one maybe that we're going to get. And it was unique conditions, and unfortunately for Johnny, probably his kind of worst nightmare happened, and I guess that's what brought so much drama to it, and made it such a memorable race. And as we said, those images of Al, Kerry, and John, and really Johnny and shoving him over the line, so he would be second, kind of hoping Mario would be sixth, was epic. And and everything the guys say immediately after that, I mean, you got to take with a grain of salt. I mean, they're just knackered and dehydrated. And I mean, Mario was saying, I mean, he could barely keep his eyes open. I mean, he was having the shutdown, also in that situation. So, I mean, even the athletes are good. They really suffer in those conditions. And, and in the end, we had this moment of Rich kind of knew what Mario needed to do, and when he saw he was going to be fifth, and he kind of crossed just before and kind of celebrated with him. So that was a nice moment for us as well. And I mean, it just brought so much drama to it, and I mean, I don't know how it's going to be seen in the future, but with the day, with social media now, I mean, just massive shares and around the world. So. Huge impact on that one. Obviously delighted for Mario to come out with that. I mean, when you've had the season he's at 4 wins in a second for the 5, and then, making the best of the final. I mean, you just don't know if you're going to be able to do that again. You never know whether you're going to get those conditions again. So, for us, I mean, it was no secret it was a big season goal. We thought it was perhaps slightly more controllable than the games were in terms of resources all going into one race than the series. And, obviously he would have loved to, as would have Rich, to get a medal in Rio, but equally the series for him, we knew as the season progressed that this was more and more of a possibility, and, huge achievement for him. So delighted. And, on to the women's race. I mean, it was equally spectacular in a different way, with Flora really rising to the occasion and seizing that World Championships in a really dominant way. And I mean, I think everyone was just delighted for her, the way that she took the race to the others. And she of course knew the situation, and she needed to, if Gwen had won, she needed to be second, and so therefore it wasn't entirely in Gwen's control, meaning winning the race wasn't enough, that she actually had to have someone else between her and Flora, and Flora was able to do it and create a big enough gap along with the two Brits, Lucy Hall and Jessica Learmonth, and they were able to, have quite a substantial gap. And then Flora had a great run, and really nobody from that chase pack made inroads on her to any significance.
Yeah, it was a great race. The tactical side was really played into Flora Duffy's hand, in the sense that it looked like this time the two Brit women were allowed to work with her. I don't know what was the team orders for this race, but definitely having those two to ride with was an advantage. And on top of that, Flora was able to have a really solid run and just basically like dominate the race. And I think it was I think two things are great. I think it's great for the sport that somebody else from Gwen won the world championship. I think having somebody dominate on one side is a good thing, because you have somebody that's a incredible athlete that just provides the standard for everyone. At the same time, from a fan perspective, you want to see other people being involved in discussing the win, and on the other hand, I think that having Flora win out of very strong swim and bikes just elevates the level of the sport overall, and if we continue to have a healthy mix between technical courses and not technical courses on the bike, then we're going to see that there's going to be a better balance between those athletes that are better on the swim bike and the athletes that are overwhelmingly good runners. So I think that seeing Flora Duffy win the world championship was really good for the sport, I felt.
Absolutely, and I mean, I thought Gwen was very gracious about and complimentary about Flora's win. I mean, no doubt that she really wanted to win. I mean, I think, somebody as competitive as Gwen is never going to really not want to win. But equally, obviously, her post Rio was very, very, very different, likely, as the gold medalist than many of the others. The obligations you have, as we've talked about before, make it difficult to keep winning, and the advantage really was for Flora because of the point situation. So, but yeah, I mean, it was fantastic to see her do that, and I think it's, as you say, good for the sport, and from Flora being around for a long time, from juniors on, and to see her progression and development has been really interesting and fun to watch, and the really taking hold of the race. I mean, it's one thing to know, okay, mathematically, what have you got to do? But then to actually make that happen is very, very difficult. And the fact that she was able to do that was really fantastic to watch. So really, it was really a great grand final, and I mean, it's just an example of the level of racing that we get in the series and the different part. I mean, part of me wishes we had the one-day world champs, but on the other hand, these sorts of dramas are interesting too. Where you've spread it out over the course of the season, and the ideas of what races you're going to pick. Do you do them all? Do you pick the ones to your strengths? How do you organize your preparation? I mean, it's another element that makes the sport interesting, and I do think it has brought a lot to ITU racing.
Yeah, I'm still a pretty big fan of one day world championships. I think just because our sport is centered in the Olympics, and the Olympics are about performing on one day. So having the world championship in one day, I think is something that's pretty big. At the same time, obviously, a world championship on one day in the same year that the Olympics happen, kind of like is deflated. So I think that in the end, having this world championship in Olympic year being a series of races, I think it's pretty adequate.
And that kind of raises the hypothetical question: would Ali have stopped for Joni if it was a one-day race? I think we'll leave that one for speculation. But yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I'm conflicted on it. I like both, and yeah, I mean, I love that Mario won Chicago last year, so he's kind of got a bit of that, bit of both of those. But really, that brings to the end of the World Series of this quadrennial, I guess, and be interesting to see as kind of the hashtag switches to Road to Tokyo, which it probably already has. and inevitably people start refocusing, and there's the thought about what are the Japanese going to do, and in preparation for their home games. And incidentally, they got their first ever World Series medal with ITU WADA on the women's side this race, but that would be interesting to see, and just how the process rolls on. We don't know what the qualification is going to be. We don't know whether it's going to be a sprint or Olympic race. I think there's a question about that. We don't know whether there's going to be a team race potentially. I know that ITU is still pushing for that. So we roll on.
Yeah, it's just one season is almost done. From my end here, I still have Kona for the hotels. I still have some athletes doing the end of the season World Cups. The end of the season World Cups in Asia, and I also have 5 athletes doing the Highland House triathlon, and I know that you also have athletes there. So yeah, it just keeps going, and then after the season is done, we'll just roll into the December training camp and just getting things ready for the next season. It's just never stopping, never ending kind of deal, huh?
Before enlightenment, you chop wood and carry water. After enlightenment, you chop wood and carry water.
That's a pretty good quote. I don't think I've ever heard it before.
Right, so maybe the next time we talk will either be before or after Kona. We definitely do one after Kona, so we'll go back to some training topics probably after the Kona one. But send us questions, feedback on Twitter, on email, podcast@joephilly.com, or leave us a review on iTunes, and we'll be back.
Yep. See you next time.